on Money Talk 1010 AM. It's the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan and Roxanne Wilder are discussing everything from world, national, and local issues to information from the unknown. And since Morgan's an attorney, there'll probably be a little something from the law. Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Good to see everybody back over the Thanksgiving holiday. You're back, Morgan. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I was out in the woods, so I feel a little refreshed and charged back up. You know, I like to go out there in the woods, hang out with the little fox squirrels and all the birds. It's really nice.
You're such a guy of sophistication, and you just love to go out there in the woods and be like the Beverly Hillbilly. What do you do when you're out there?
Lots of sitting. Well, actually, a lot of reading. Reading's a big thing if you get tired of just sitting and listening to birds and listening to the wind blow and looking at the trees. I find all that very fascinating. And then sort of just daydreaming away.
We don't do enough of all of those things. And you do, I have to say, like just seem, and obviously you feel more refreshed when you come back from that.
Sure, yeah. But, you know, it's almost like it makes you wonder, should you ever come back? You know, when you go somewhere and you come back feeling so good, it's like, Maybe I should move to that place and occasionally visit this place.
Just hang your shingle out on a tree.
Look,
well,
I'll
that's
have
true.
Go ahead.
There are places that you go to, like you go to New York City, and you say, well, this is great. I loved getting that energy, but I wouldn't want to live there.
Right.
But this is a place you say, I will go hang my shingle.
Well, you know, I hear there's really a big unserved legal market for squirrels' estates. I mean, you know, they squirrel all their nuts away somewhere, and they don't always get to live to eat all those nuts. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could get into that. I don't know. They probably pay me in peanuts, though, which that probably wouldn't work. But, you know, speaking of peanuts, I'll tell you what. Today, well, I wanted to share with you, if you hadn't ever tried this, one of the things that we had, I had some more last night, one of the things we have over Thanksgiving that's kind of becoming a family tradition in my family is peanut soup. Now, have you ever heard of that? Okay, this is something that comes from Virginia. Mm-hmm. Virginia
I've
peanut
never heard
soup.
of this.
Oh, it's fantastic. Last time I was in D.C., I was talking to people about it, and they're like, you're making that up.
It sounds like peanut butter.
Yeah, well,
in the microwave.
Well, let's say peanut butter is one of the ingredients, and it's peanut butter and water, basically. It's more than that, believe me. But, you know, that kind of gets the gist of it. But I tell you, that stuff is fantastic. But they thought it wasn't a thing, and I said, no, that's a thing. Mm-hmm. Peanut soup is a thing. It's a Virginia thing, too.
Who makes it in your family?
Well, usually my mom. She does most of the making of stuff so that it comes out nice, as opposed to, you know, I tend to be a laissez-faire cook. Kind of a hands-off cook. Mm-hmm. You know, I prefer to be able to put something on, come back 30 to 45 minutes later, possibly if I forget, 55 to an hour and a half later.
Well done.
And have it done, you know. So, that, you know, I think in order to be a true cook, you have to stand there with the stuff while it's cooking.
Oh, sure.
So how was your Thanksgiving? You guys haven't shared anything about yours.
What's funny is I've been telling everybody all last week, I was like, watch out when you go to the airports. It's going to be just absolutely chaotic. I flew to Miami on Friday around lunchtime. We flew back yesterday morning. Miami Airport. Imagine how difficult that normally is. It was easy.
Oh, it was deserted,
easy. Huh? No, it was definitely busy both days, but I think they just had really good logistics. I think they were very well prepared. Tampa International is the best. And now they have you go up to the fourth floor to go across on the monorail, because they've redone things, and it's just gorgeous, even better than it was before. We do have one of the best airports in the country, if not the best, now that all the renovations have taken place.
Yeah. I saw an article on that in the St. Pete or Tampa Bay Times now, talking about how proud we are of our airport and how we don't think if there's a list of the best airports, it's not legitimate unless we're probably one or two.
No.
And that is fair to say. It's true. I mean, it is a pleasure to deal with Tampa International Airport. Although I still don't like the whole naked body scanner, pat you down thing, but what can you do?
That's at all of them.
What can you do? It's at all of them and getting worse. Speaking of things that are getting worse, poor George Papadopoulos, is apparently had to report for jail this morning or maybe yesterday evening to start his 2-week sentence in federal. I guess they're actually sending him to prison. Although typically when you think of prison, it's like, typically for longer period of time, a year or more, jail is something, where if you get jailed, that's usually 30 days, that kind of thing in the county jail. So that's a shorter time frame. But I guess since it's a federal crime, they don't have any place to put him but federal prison. So I guess he's going to go to prison for 14 days. I feel kind of bad for George Papadopoulos in a way. Now, we don't know all the details of all the investigations, but, I mean, could you even imagine if the FBI was investigating something that you were involved in, the amount of pressure that would be on you?
Right.
And, I mean, we all know, we've studied and we've thought about the failings of human memory. I mean, we know that you can see something and not see everything, or you can see things that aren't there. I mean, there's that old study that, it's not that old, but where they were tossing the ball around and says, count how many times the white team tosses the ball to the black team. And they do that. And then at the end of the video, they asked, now, did you see the gorilla? And everybody's saying, I didn't see the gorilla. Well, there's a giant gorilla comes running. Of course, it's a person in a gorilla suit, but comes running into the middle, dancing around. Doesn't interact with the ball, but people don't see it because they're focused on the ball. So, when you have a federal investigator come in and say, when did this happen? What's the sequence? And you just start kind of going from memory, you may not have a perfect memory of exactly how it went down. And that's how you can get yourself into a lot of trouble.
Well, there's another little aspect there, too. Like you said, you may have not seen it the correct way the first time around, but then however many years later, you misremember. And that's a word that is not a real word, but came about in the baseball steroid allegations or the trials then. The hearings, I should say. Hearings, yes.
Right.
So Roger Clemens misremembered.
Is that who misremembered what happened? Well, I guess it beats Hillary Clinton, who just can't remember anything, like during the Whitewater investigation. That came very clear through Ken Starr's book, Contempt, that Hillary Clinton's basic position was just to say, I don't remember about almost everything she'd get in trouble for. What's the takeaway message, though? I mean, did they convict her of perjury for not being able to remember?
Right.
It's clear she's lying, right? She's the most smartest, the most competent woman who's ever lived on the face of this planet. Maybe since Jezebel, all right? Should just make her king of the world or something, queen of the world. This lady can't remember anything. I don't believe it. Nobody believed it. The investigators didn't believe it, but you aren't able to convict somebody for perjury on that or lying to federal investigators. But you go saying something like Papadopoulos did, and all of a sudden things can get tossed around, mixed up, and it turns out you were lying to investigators even though you probably didn't mean to. He's probably trying to tell what he thought the truth was, I'm going to guess. In any event, now he's going to jail for that. And I just think it's a real disappointment when we have these big federal investigations that we spent millions of dollars on. I mean, $30, $40 million have probably been spent on the Robert Mueller investigation to date. And we're getting things like 14-day jail sentences for lying to investigators during the investigation, which I call process crimes just because, it's like happens during the investigation. Everything that happened that was a crime probably happened before the investigation started. And then what happens after the investigation, I think, is not as important. Now, I'm not saying you should be able to lie with impunity to federal investigators at all. I'm just saying when that becomes the only thing that they ever come out of these investigations with, is that's what they hang their hat on, then I think the investigation's been a big failure. Because I don't want to just have investigations that result in people getting in trouble for the way they behaved in the investigation. We'll constantly all be under investigation. Like Mason and the Sarge were saying, we are kind of with this Alexa stuff now that we're all putting in our households. They're taking notes. The computers are taking notes on what we're saying, and they're storing them essentially forever somewhere. Now, we don't have access to it. It's not on your little Alexa or Google Home device in your house. It's not stored there. It's not recorded there. As soon as you say it, it's instantly transmitted, just like it is from your cell phone. This has come out now. And they say, well, we don't record everything you say. Well, maybe by using that word record in a way that you don't understand, you think they're being generous and saying we don't record as in we don't ever take or keep or monitor that stuff. But that's not what they're saying. They're just simply saying we don't have a cassette recorder that we push record on. That's what they mean, because that stuff is being transmitted right out of your phone, and that's how you can be talking about something that you've never searched for, and all of a sudden you're going to a site that you like and the banner ads are popping up for it.
I tell you what, I'm not a big shopper. I always think to myself, do I want to buy this? Okay, how many hours do I have to work for it? And then I decide I don't want it. But every single thing that pops up on my Instagram, I'm not a big shopper. And I'm like, I've got to have that. I've got to have that. They know me so well.
They know exactly how to. Yep, they know what to send and when. And the sad thing is they're going to be getting better and better at this. And so we're kind of losing our ability, if we ever had it, to be thoughtful, careful consumers because they're learning how to manipulate us.
They know us better than we know ourselves.
That's right. Well, I tell you, I want to get into some of this stuff. We got to talk a little bit about what's going on over in the Ukraine, in Russia and the Ukraine and near Crimea. And that will also inform us and lead us into some stuff that's going on in Syria, which I think is very important. And we got to get to that stuff, folks. So if you're enjoying listening and you want to get on the horn, the number to call us is 888-404-1010. We'll be happy to get you on the horn. We're also going to talk about the migrant invasion, and we'll discuss some of the language that's being used around that. Maybe it really is an invasion. And I want to tell you a really interesting story about the Chinese tariffs and how well they are working out for us here in America. And we got a lot more than that. We're going to get into it all when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We have got so many things to cover today. I suppose you probably saw the headlines about Russia shooting at and taking possession of 3 ships over in the Ukraine, over near Crimea, which was that disputed area of land that Russia annexed several years ago.
How bad is that?
I've got to say, I'm not sure. First of all, it seems to me, if you read the news story, the Russians say the ships were behaving erratically and wouldn't slow down. So, we've seen so many of those videos.
That's true. That's good reason.
Well, I mean, you have to look. They control that strait. That's their only way to get out of the Black Sea. So that they totally control that strait there, and they're not going to, just like we would consider shutting down the Suez Canal an act of war or something. They're not going to just let anything go on in there that anybody wants, including potential terrorist attacks. Because remember, they built. It's been about 4 years ago. They built, when they took over Crimea, they built a big overwater bridge there to connect Crimea with Russia proper. Over a bridge. And so imagine if a boat wanted to blow up that bridge or something, in a terrorist attack. I mean, they can't allow that to happen, and that's all right there in those in the Straits of Kerch. But I really think it's interesting because the president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, came right out and declared martial law for 60 days. That's well into January of next year. Now, here's the thing. They've got an election coming up in March of next year. And he's already indicated that if things aren't, to his liking by then, he can extend the martial law. Well, what does martial law mean, right? It means people can't get together.
Okay, and you don't have changeovers in government.
Well, you may have an election, but can you campaign for it ahead of time? That's the key. Okay, because how do you campaign if you're not allowed to get together in big groups because martial law has been declared? And how do you let free-flowing information? Because remember, a part of martial law is typically controlling the media, right?
Sure.
Take over the media, so that only certain things can be run. They can't just have a free-for-all because we're declaring martial law. So let's play this scenario out. Let's say you were Petro Poroshenko and you had decided among your little cabal of people that you're listening to who are advising you that you need to get this country into martial law so that you can control the outcome of the election. Now, what would be a way that you might be able to do that? Hey, let's send a couple of ships to drive straight at the Russian Navy in kind of a crazy Ivan, let's turn it around on them and send them right at them and then see what they do. And then when they do what obviously any nation would do in response, then we'll call that essentially an act of war, declare martial law, and then try to push things even maybe a little bit further.
Right.
Now, we don't know that's what happened. I'm just looking at the interests involved, looking at who benefits. And I don't see a benefit for Russia. I mean, I don't see that Russia, just randomly said, oh, you know what? You see those 3 ships over there not bothering anybody? Let's go capture them for no reason and create an international incident. Because Russia's already under siege from all sides.
Sure.
And they're trying to avoid being drawn into a war that they don't want to be drawn into. Let's face it. We've been talking on this show for years now about how the United States wants to go to war with Russia. And the sooner the better. And when I say the United States, should be a little more clear about that. The defense establishment within the United States has decided that war with Russia is inevitable, and we will be in the best position to fight them the sooner we begin the war. So the more time that passes, the better they will get and the less good we will get at what we're doing, at fighting wars and things. So we're kind of in that mindset, we've already peaked. So we better get to battle now before we lose too much of what we had before.
Because
and we
they
can't
put
win.
so much of their resources into military.
I don't necessarily know that that's it, but you look at what we did during the Clinton years and then during the Obama years, and they completely gutted the military in many ways. They destroyed the officer corps in many ways. So there are a lot of issues there about whether we are, truly as ready as we could be. Now, the thing is, we could probably get ready pretty quickly, though, to go to war. I still think it's clear that if we were to go to war with Russia, we would be the favorite. We are more powerful militarily than Russia, period. Now, that doesn't mean that we should go to war with Russia because the favorite in a war still loses, generally.
Sure.
Who wins in war? Nobody wins at the end of the day. I mean, you tell me a war where the victor, has really won something. Other than taking other people's resources and property, which can be very valuable, but is also theft and, a craven act, there are no winners in war. We all lose. The people lose. We lose the monetary value of the things that we blow up. We build just to be blown up. All that's lost. It's called deadweight social loss. I mean, it's gone from the face of the planet. We got to now mine more minerals to create metal to then build another tank. So war is a huge waste of human energy and human potential. And interestingly, over the break, I read a book by Nikola Tesla. It was a fascinating book called The Problem of Increasing Human Energy. And one of the things that he said, it was three things, but one of them was that one of the most important ways to increase human potential and energy is to eliminate war because of how much human potential and energy war saps to no good end.
Goes into it, right.
Yeah, to no good end. So speaking of war, now we've got things going on also in Aleppo in Syria, that town in Syria, in case Gary Johnson's listening. Aleppo was apparently attacked by chlorine gas. They say it came from al-Qaeda militants. Of course, I think at this point we're completely unable to judge, because we're getting information passed through so many people, and many of the people have interests. They're stakeholders in this matter, so they want it to come out a certain way, so we can't trust them to be straight with us. One thing I'll point out to you about this whole chemical weapons thing, one, chlorine gas, again, we've told you that's basically the lowest level of chemical weapon, chlorine gas, although it's, look, you don't want to be breathing the stuff. I mean, you don't want it in your house. But the other thing I'll point out is it looked like they hospitalized, they said, about 70 people. And I'll just say that's not a ton of people. You're thinking about a neighborhood or something. So if they bombed an area, it wasn't a huge area.
Over 100 wounded, but only 70.
Well, they said went to the hospital. Yes. And that there again, we run into the issues of knowing whether or not we can trust the information coming from the white helmets about exactly who's been wounded and why. I mean, we've seen the videos of them kind of washing the kids off, remember, and the kids weren't actually sick with any kind of chemical thing, but they were washing them off for video to say, oh, look, we had to wash them down because they were covered in the chemical weapons. So there's a lot of propaganda going on out there that you got to sort through. And we've got some going on here stateside, some propaganda. If you look at this whole migrant invasion situation that we've got going on down on the southern border right now, it's like if you remember when, I don't know, what was it, about 3-4 months ago where the pictures and videos came out, maybe it was even a little longer, about detaining the children at the border. And they had pictures of children, and it looked like they had been put essentially in a dog cage. It looked like they had put children in a dog cage. And then you look at a different picture, and you realize that the photographer was the one in the cage shooting the child back out of the cage. So the child was not actually in the cage when he was being photographed, but it was all made to look like the child was in the cage so that we at home would feel terrible about the situation because you can't put children in cages. What kind of barbarians are we? And now here we go again because we had this, what they call this migrant horde has come up from Honduras and other places. They're now in the Tijuana area and just below the southern border near the checkpoint San Isidro, which is in San Diego, also near Tijuana. So all these folks are there, and, they tried to storm the border over the weekend. They literally tried by force to force their way into the country. Now, thank goodness this irritated some people, and that we finally have some movement on people saying, hey, you can't behave like this. Even Mexico's saying, we're going to go in there, and those folks who tried to storm the border, we're going to get them, we're going to deport them back to Honduras or Guatemala or wherever they came from. because you can't behave like that. Meanwhile, while they're invading, they've all got the flags of their home country. Okay, so we're being told by the media this is not an invasion, this is an act of love. But these people don't want to follow our laws. They don't want to come here properly. It's like a house guest that doesn't knock, but they kick your front door in, and they're talking about how great their house is. They brought their flag and everything. They're like, oh, man, it's so great where we came from. Well, you know what? Then get your tail back there, because I didn't invite you, and you kicked my door in. I mean, it's unbelievable to me what we are asked to view as should be a natural act of charity, when, in fact, these people are thieves and, brigands. It's not charity to let them steal from us. We have to have some kind of law and order. And it just really floors me. So that brings me to one of my final points about that. And what I kind of wanted to get to on that is, if you look again at the pictures that are coming out, I mean, you will see this one picture of what appears to be a mother with her children, although we have no reason to believe that they're actually her children. But she's got some children with her that she's holding their hands, and they appear to be running. And it looks like there's a smoke bomb right near them. And, the U.S. forces, we gassed these poor women and children. It was like chlorine gas or something. No. This was a staged photograph. And you can, if you actually look at the photograph, the amazing thing is you can see a bunch of other photographers staging photographs in the background.
I just saw this in the San Diego Tribune. The Obama administration also used force and tear gas back in 2013 when a large group of people stormed the border and threw rocks at the agents at the exact same place.
Well, what are you supposed to do? I mean, do we have to just move out of their way because they want to be forceful and they want their way in? Or do they have to follow the law? And if they refuse to follow the law, then they have to face the consequences that lawbreakers face, which includes, police action, force being used on them. It's perfectly natural. Actions have consequences. We're coming right back.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. I'm Roxanne Wilder. So good to be back with these two fellas. Every Monday you can find us, and then the replay at 5 p.m. And we're going to talk a little China and tariffs. And I don't want to go ahead and give it away, but things look better for us than they do for them.
They really do. I mean, when President Trump started his policy of America first and trying to use tariffs to change the manufacturing situation in the world. In other words, back in the 90s, if you remember, during the Clinton years, there was a big push for globalization and to move all of our factories over to China. And for a while, it seemed we benefited from that because all of a sudden we could get stuff very cheaply that we had previously been paying more money for, because it's more expensive to employ American workers than it is to employ, poor people in China who may even be slaves. And, of course, there's plenty of stories on all that. But President Trump came into office and he had this idea, which is we should try to use tariffs to force manufacturing to move back to America, because it's good to have our own manufacturing here. It employs people. It maintains skills that are needed for national security. I mean, if we don't make anything, how are we ever going to start making tanks again, when we need to? It's important to have industry. Wartime industry tends to come out of private industry like the automobile industry. And so it's important to have manufacturing here. And we could have a lot of little manufacturing here, and particularly with advances in AI, computers, and robotics, we can have manufacturing here that doesn't rely so heavily on human power, but relies more on technological advances that we've made. All these things would be a good thing if we're producing and consuming more things here in our own country rather than importing them. Now, if you remember, the tariff situation has never been fair with China. We essentially have no tariffs on Chinese imports, goods coming into our country from China. But the reverse is not true. And perhaps much more importantly, China manipulates its currency to keep the prices of its exports, so the goods that we're buying from China, low. But that also keeps the prices of the goods that we want to sell to China high for China. So they, by manipulating their currency, can cause us to want to buy a lot of their stuff, but they don't want to buy any of our stuff. And that's the situation. And I'm generalizing, but I'm trying to break it down where we can explain it to folks, so hopefully they can understand it. So when President Trump said, we're not going to do this anymore, this era is over with of us just letting China run roughshod over us. And he came into office and he said, we're going to put tariffs in place on Chinese goods. And what did everybody who's anybody in intellectual circles in Washington and everywhere else, what did they say? That's a horrible idea. That's going to lead to the Second Great Depression. That's just exactly what happened under the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act back in, 1928 or 1929. And this is going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be world-ending, right? But that doesn't seem to have happened. And why? Well, I guess President Trump knew what he was talking about. I guess he really did know what he was talking about, which is that China needs us actually a lot more than we need them. So we can put some significant tariffs on them, and they really won't be able to do anything about it, particularly if we pick the right goods and services, particularly goods, to put tariffs on. So U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, if you haven't heard his name before, he's the one doing a lot of the negotiating of this with the Chinese, although you see occasionally President Trump meeting with President Xi of China. But generally this is being done below the president's level in terms of negotiating the specifics. But he essentially instructed the U.S. Trade Representative to initiate this 10% tariff on about $200 billion of Chinese goods, and that happened in June of this year, if you remember. It was big news at the time. And if you remember, China kind of thumbed its nose at us and said, no, this is not fair. We're not going to negotiate with you. We're going to put tariffs on other things that you want to sell to us, remember? And then President Trump raised the tariffs in August to 25%. And we've got a further raise scheduled in January of next year if China doesn't cave and they don't start behaving themselves and being a fair trade partner and not taking advantage of our free trade nature here in America. And here's what we want to tell you about, because here's what's interesting. You, the American people, are not paying those tariffs generally. By and large, that 25% tariff that's been put on Chinese goods, you know who's paying that? China. And it's not even the government of China, although you have to remember there's not much separation between the government and the private sector in China. So it's really strange to say, oh, this is private sector, because a lot of those companies are owned and controlled by the government. But nevertheless, the Chinese private sector is paying, and this is a study, by the way, coming out of a European group called Econpol Europe, or I'm guessing Economics, Politics Europe kind of thing, Econpol Europe. And so you would imagine if they're Europeans, they're more than likely going to be biased against America and probably against the things that Donald Trump is doing, if we were just to guess. Now, I don't know what their exact bias is, but they have come out with a study where they've determined of the 25% of tariffs, American consumers are paying 4.5% of that. Now, that means they're paying about a fifth of the total cost of these tariffs. The other 4/5 being paid by China. Where does that money go? Well, if it's a tariff, it goes into our treasury, right? That's money
Paying down
made
the debt.
to pay down the debt, to counterbalance the trade imbalance and other things. So it seems that the tariffs are actually working out perfectly, exactly as intended, because they are well placed on particular Chinese goods that we already know that the Chinese are just going to basically eat the tariff on those goods. So President Trump, for all his faults, and apparently he does have many, for all his faults, he seems to be doing a heck of a job with this trade negotiations and trying to correct our trade imbalance through the use of tariffs. So, I mean, I just wanted to share that with you because that's something you definitely won't hear on the mainstream media. In fact, it's the opposite of what you'll hear. You will hear the opposite of that. You will hear that any moment now, our entire economic house of cards is about to collapse.
How does all this affect us? We owe China a bunch of money.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think we ought to do, not to go too far off track here. We do owe China a bunch of money. But you know what I think we ought to do? Because remember, there were a bunch of war bonds that U.S. people purchased. Okay, we're talking about war bonds back, I think, around World War II. So there were a bunch of war bonds that U.S. consumers purchased from China that have never been paid or honored. In fact, when Mao Zedong took over in China, he declared all of those to be void, essentially. So if we owe China a lot of money, we could also say that China owes U.S. individuals a lot of money as well. And, the theory came out a few years ago that those two might ought to be set off against each other. And I kind of like that theory myself because, if they don't have to pay us for our loans way back when, then why do we have to repay them for their loans today? Right?
Right. Hey, Morgan, I have a question for you. Where are you finding this story that you just shared with us? Because I'll tell you why. When I'm looking here on our friend Google about tariffs on what Chinese goods, everything that I find is negative.
Right. Well, you'll never find this on Google because Google takes these kind of stories and it moves them far, far down the list. So you'll never find, all you're going to find when you search anymore using a search engine is going to be exactly what the prevailing authorities want you to think about something. They're not going to give you multiple viewpoints. But I read a bunch of different news aggregation websites. They pull from a bunch of different places. This one in particular came from one called Zero Hedge, zerohedge.com. You've probably heard me mention it before. It used to be one of my favorites. I have to be honest, it's not quite as high up in my estimation as it used to be, but I still find some good stuff on Zero Hedge. I find some garbage there too, but that's the point. You have to be open to reading a bunch of different things, and you have to apply your analysis. You have to think about it and apply some logic and some common sense because you're essentially now responsible for determining what is really true. You can't just count on turning on the TV, and by the way, I'm not sure if you ever could do that, but you can't just count on turning on the TV and having the commentators tell you the truth. You can't count on that anymore. They're going to mislead you. They're going to show you pictures of women and children, and those may be the only two women and children in the entire group, and that's going to be the picture you're going to see on the front page and make you think it's all women and children because they're lying to you, because they want you to think a certain way. That's called propaganda. And no country in the history of the world, as far as I'm aware, has ever made the study of propaganda that we have in America, the study of advertising, marketing, and propaganda. We studied that and mastered it like nobody else has before. And these folks are like wizards. You don't even know what they're doing to you, how they're manipulating your thoughts and emotions through images and words, and you don't even realize it. They're that good. It's just like, when you think about it, when Edward Bernays decided to make smoking popular among women by trying to convince women they could replace a meal with a cigarette. And that became a big thing. Because, women didn't used to smoke. It was gross. Only men smoked. Women didn't smoke. And they said, God, we got to, there's half the population. We could be selling cigarettes to them. We got all the GIs hooked by including them in the K rations. You get a pack a day. Got them all hooked. And they came home and the women thought it was dirty. So we got to make this acceptable and palatable to women. So let's start a campaign of showing women smoking instead of eating, and being able to get through a meal without eating because they smoked a cigarette. And that is how it caught on with women. And it's dastardly, isn't it?
Are we really evolving as humans, as civilization and society, or are we just replacing one bad habit with another?
It's a great question. Are we evolving or devolving, right? I don't
Because
know.
now we have vaping, and I think people do it even more often, and I don't know how good that is for you.
Right. But you know what? I do want to, while we've got the opportunity, I do want to give a plug to the Blue Torch Cigar Lounge over in Tampa, which is an awesome place where you can smoke cigars. And you know what? There's even some ladies, some chicas in there who are smoking cigars. So if you like cigars, men, get your butt over to Blue Torch, particularly tonight. Flashman will be there. If you are cool enough, you might even get a chance to talk on the mic a little bit. So I've been over there, and I'm going to get back there just as soon as I can because it's a great time. But because when we go to the out there, we're not coming back, And before we go there, we got to tell a little bit about what's happened to Laura Loomer.
You can't follow her anymore.
You
She's
can't.
hard to find.
She has
so
been
sad.
Banned for life from Twitter.
Yes.
And it was all because of some stuff that she said about this Minnesota Congresswoman-elect, Ilhan Omar. And frankly, she told the truth. She just said what Sharia means, and she just pointed out some of the things that this soon-to-be Congresswoman said, including, and I'm going to read you a quote here, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. So that's very anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. That's what she said. Laura Loomer called her out on it, rightly so, told the truth. And what happens? Who gets banned? Does the lady who supports violence against young women, and we could get into that, but we don't want to get into too much detail. Does she get banned? No. Laura Loomer gets banned for calling her out on her. That's wrong, and that's not going to lead us to anywhere good. We're going to go out there when we come back. Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We're getting ready to go out there, and, we just finished up talking about Laura Loomer, who got kind of flushed down the toilet at Twitter recently. She got banned for saying something inappropriate. There's a reason I'm saying that. You guys aren't laughing. I was hoping that was going to get a laugh out of you because this leads right into our Out There segment.
You haven't given us a hint what you're doing, so we don't know whether we should laugh or not.
Rox knows. Rox knows.
Okay.
She's on the
toilet humor.
She's on the right side of the booth here. But, this is a story that just came out, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and it involves toilets. And, they're developing, and this is coming out of the European Space Agency, is at least the one that's trying to push forward the development of this. Although there's some different groups working on different ways of doing it. But they're trying to develop a smart toilet. Now, talk about things you didn't know that you needed. I mean, first we had the smart meters on our house, and they had to come out and replace all those. And you know why they did that, right? Because they can remotely turn you off now. When you don't pay your power bill, they don't have to send somebody out to your house to shut the meter off. They can just do it from their computer. Makes great sense for them. Okay, so now we all got these smart meters, and there's some issues with them, but leaving that aside. And then we got these smart thermostats. Remember those? And it's like, oh, you can change the air conditioning from when you're not even at home. And I say, well, who in the world would need to do that, Well, we've got to have this. I mean, it's really smart. You need a smart thermostat. It'll save you money.
Alexa does that now.
Yeah, now you got people like Pat George, got Alexa in every room telling her what to do and everything. I mean, so this smart. So what's the next step? What is the final frontier, right? And the library, the final frontier. Let's have a toilet that now analyzes the things that you deposit into it for you and tells you whether you've got any health issues. But they're not stopping there, okay? Because this isn't just something that you might want to have at home, although, frankly, I'm kind of horrified to think about this. It's going to communicate directly with your smartphone, so while you're surfing in the bathroom, you can even find out on the spot if you've got any health issues that are, well, let's just say manifesting themselves. It's just disgusting in my mind that your toilet is going to be communicating with your smartphone about you.
Does it listen to you and then play back the sounds?
Well,
That's
it's interesting.
funny.
They can determine your mood. As we were talking, you don't have to have a mood ring on,
No.
right? As Mason and the Sarge were talking about, they can determine your mood based on the tone of your voice. And who knows, the tone of other things, too, maybe. I just don't know. But it's pretty disgusting to think about.
Well, they already try to determine our mood based on the emoji that we would post on a Facebook post.
Sure.
So they ask you, what's your mood? What's your mood? So now they've kind of aligned that with our home habits, our tone of voice, and now our toilet habits.
Now, let's take it one step further because this is what's coming. Imagine now that public toilets are smart toilets.
Gross.
Smart. I'm not sure if we should call this smart. Somebody used the phrase surveillance masquerading as routine technology, S-M-A-R-T, smart. Smartphone, smart thermostat, smart doorbell, all these things which, smart Alexa, they all enable the computers, the mind that is somewhere, we don't know where it is, but the mind that exists maybe out in that Utah data center where they've got all those servers, they allow that to listen in to all everything that's going on in your house. So it really is surveillance in the style of 1984, where if you remember in that book, which is fascinating, and if you haven't read it recently, I would recommend you go back and reread it, or if you've never read it, you will find it to almost perfectly describe the situation that we find ourselves in now. But interestingly, in that book, which was written many, many years ago, back in, I think, the 40s, the idea was that the television set, the television monitor, would also have a microphone in it, which we've got. We've got that. Now we've just got microphones and everything. We've got it in our thermostat and our doorbell and everything else. So, we've got this theory where we say, anything you do in public isn't private, basically, and, you can't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in a lot of things. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in going to a public toilet?
Yes.
I mean, do you?
Sure.
Well, okay. Well, I'm telling you now, maybe in the United States it won't happen, but they're talking about rolling these out for monitoring disease and other issues. But let's talk about one of the things that they really are going to monitor, because they're going to be able to get DNA and other things out of these samples. They're really going to know basically everything about your health situation, including your genetic predisposition for disease. Now, if they can connect the fact that your smartphone is in your pocket, they've got a proximity sensor, they know exactly who's just used that toilet. You don't have to sign in or anything. You just go use the public toilet. They know exactly who just deposited that sample.
Oh.
Yeah, to be
So scary.
to be tested.
And gross.
Isn't that disgusting? And how is that not violative of your health privacy rights, HIPAA, and other things? I mean, did you consent to a test being run on a sample of your deposits? Did you consent to that? Not in one of these smart toilets. There's no opportunity to. Now, what happens if you don't even know that you've given it? And they say, well, that was something you discarded in public. And anything you discarded in public, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in. Well, I don't know. I mean, this is where we're seeing the clash of the ideas, the long-standing ideals of privacy with a lot of this smart technology, and the idea that you cannot have any privacy in public, which I'm not sure is an idea that we've ever held before in humanity.
Isn't it the same thing when they take a coffee cup that somebody drank on, they want to get the DNA, and they can solve a murder with that?
Exactly. That's right. So if you've committed some crime and you're in for a police interview and they offer you a cigarette, I mean, that's an old trick. You leave that cigarette butt, they can take it, get the saliva off it, and they've now got your DNA. And maybe I shouldn't have shared that with folks. I think that's so old now. I think everybody's seen it on TV, I think, with all these cop shows and the popularity. So they probably have new techniques that are even better now. And what if they had these toilets everywhere? Now that's a technique. I mean, they can just say, okay, where has smartphone owner Morgan Streetman made deposits recently? Okay, and what did those deposits look like? What did they, a DNA sense? I don't think they're actually going to pull up. Let's hope they don't pull up visual images, okay? But what did they look like from a DNA perspective? What was his DNA, and also what is his disease susceptibility? And hey, I think we might better up his insurance rates, because now we know he's definitely going to get prostate cancer, because we can see that in his DNA identification, the identifiers within there. So how can you keep that private? You don't even know what you're doing. And
I can tell you how to keep it quiet. Carry a roll of toilet paper and find a bush.
Go pioneer style, right? Get you one of those military shovels and dig you a cat hole, like we used to do, 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot. And I'll leave the rest of your imagination. Make sure you fill the cat hole in when you're finished, okay? Well, this is an idea that I think ought to be flushed down the toilet, frankly. The idea of putting these things in public for monitoring disease and everything else. It's a joke. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.